1873, Wyoming Territory. Josephine Sullivan was waist deep in the icy spring river, soaking wet, when she heard the laughter. Not polite laughter, not sympathetic laughter. Deep, genuine, unrestrained amusement from the Apache warrior standing on the bank watching her struggle against the current. Her carpetbag floated downstream. Her carefully pinned hair hung in dripping ropes down her back. Her best dress, the dark green calico she had saved for making a good impression in her new teaching position, clung to her like a second skin. And this man, this infuriating stranger, was laughing at her misery. Josephine glared at him through wet strands of chestnut hair plastered across her face. He stood there in traditional buckskin and beaded vest, arms crossed over his broad chest, dark eyes dancing with mirth. His long black hair caught the afternoon sunlight as his shoulders shook with silent laughter. She tried to take a dignified step toward shore. Her boot slipped on a river rock and she flailed, barely catching herself before going under completely. More laughter from the bank. That was it. Josephine Sullivan had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston to start fresh in Wyoming Territory. She had endured cramped trains, dusty stagecoaches, and the suspicious stares of every person who learned a single woman planned to teach in a frontier town. She had not come all this way to be mocked by some arrogant man who found her humiliation entertaining. She planted her feet as firmly as she could on the slippery river bottom and fixed him with her sternest schoolteacher glare, the kind that had made rowdy boys twice her size sit down and behave back in Boston. Her voice came out colder than the spring runoff soaking through her petticoats. I fail to see what is so amusing. He finally stopped laughing, though his lips still twitched with suppressed humor. When he spoke, his English was flawless, with only the slightest accent. You walked right into the deepest part of the river without looking, like a little bird who forgot it cannot swim. The stepping stones were supposed to be there. Josephine gestured furiously at the empty space where the stage driver had assured her she would find a safe crossing. I was told there were stones. Spring runoff washed them away 3 days ago. He tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling dark eyes. Everyone in town knows this. You must be the new school teacher they have been talking about. Of course he knew. Of course the entire town probably knew about the foolish Eastern woman who could not even cross a river without falling in. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks, despite the icy water numbing her legs. Are you going to help me? Or just stand there finding entertainment in my predicament? Something shifted in his expression. The amusement faded, replaced by a look she could not quite read. He moved then, stepping down the rocky bank with the sure-footed grace of someone who knew this land intimately. He waded into the current without hesitation, water rising past his knees, his moccasins finding purchase where Josephine had found only treacherous rocks. He reached her in moments. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had first thought. Tall and powerfully built, with strong features and intelligence in his eyes that made her earlier assumption of simple mockery seem foolish. There were scars on his forearms, the kind that spoke of battles survived. He could not be much older than 30. But he carried himself with the authority of a leader. "Give me your hand," he said quietly. Josephine hesitated. She had been warned about trusting strangers in this wild place, especially native men, according to the concerned matrons on the stagecoach, who had clutched their reticules and whispered dire warnings. But those same matrons had also told her the river crossing was safe, and look where that advice had landed her. She placed her cold, wet hand in his. His grip was warm and steady. He pulled her toward him with careful strength, then turned and guided her through the current. She stumbled twice, but each time his hand tightened on hers, keeping her upright. The water tugged at her skirts with surprising force, but he moved through it as though it were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. When they reached the bank, he released her hand and stepped back a respectful distance. Josephine stood there dripping, acutely aware of how she must look. Her hair hung in tangles past her shoulders. Her dress was plastered to her body in a way that would have horrified her mother. Water pooled around her boots, and she could not stop shivering. "Your bag," he said, pointing downstream where her carpet bag had caught on a fallen log about 20 yards away. "I see it." Josephine wrapped her arms around herself, trying to preserve some warmth and dignity. "Thank you for your help. I apologize for my sharp words." He shrugged one shoulder. "You had reason to be angry. I should not have laughed." But there was still a hint of amusement in his eyes that suggested he did not entirely regret it. "What is your name?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Improper," her mother would have said. But her mother was 2,000 miles away, and Josephine was standing soaking wet in front of a man who had just saved her from drowning in her own stubborn pride. "Ethan." He studied her face as though memorizing it. "My mother was Apache. My father was a trapper named Sullivan, who died before I was born. The Apache raised me, but I learned English from the missionaries." He paused. "You are also Sullivan." "Josephine Sullivan." She managed not to let her teeth chatter as she said it. "It seems we share a name, if not a father. Perhaps we are distant relatives." His lips quirked. "Though I think not. There were many trappers named Sullivan in this territory." A gust of wind cut through her wet clothing, and Josephine shivered violently. Ethan's expression grew serious. He moved before she could protest, shrugging out of his leather vest and draping it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled of sage and wood smoke. "You need dry clothes and a fire before the cold sets into your bones. The town is another mile. Can you walk?" "Of course I can walk." Josephine pulled the vest tighter around herself, grateful for its warmth, even as she knew accepting it was improper. "I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "I can see that." His tone was dry. "That is why you are standing here soaking wet, while your belongings float downstream." She wanted to argue, but another violent shiver cut off her retort. Ethan shook his head and started walking toward the fallen log where her carpetbag waited. Josephine followed, her boots squelching with each step. He retrieved her bag easily, then turned back to study her with an expression that had gone from amused to concerned. "You are shaking too much. The walk to town will take too long." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "My camp is close. You can dry your clothes and warm yourself by my fire. Then I will take you to the schoolhouse." Every warning Josephine had received screamed at her to refuse. Proper young ladies did not go to strange men's camps, especially not native men in isolated wilderness locations. She should insist on walking to town immediately, cold and wet or not. But another gust of wind knifed through her, and she felt her resolve crumble along with her body temperature. She was already soaked and freezing. Walking another mile in wet clothes could make her seriously ill. And despite his earlier laughter, Ethan had helped her without hesitation. His eyes held no threat, only genuine concern. Sometimes survival required trusting strangers. Sometimes propriety had to bow to practicality. "All right," Josephine said through chattering teeth. "Thank you." He nodded and gestured for her to follow him up the rocky bank. They walked in silence through tall pines and new spring grass, following a narrow trail that showed signs of frequent use. Josephine tried to stop shivering and failed. Her fingers had gone numb, and her feet felt like blocks of ice in her waterlogged boots. After about 10 minutes, they emerged into a small clearing where a well-built shelter of pine branches and canvas stood near a stone fire circle. A magnificent paint horse grazed nearby, lifting its head to watch them approach. The camp was neat and organized, with supplies stored in leather packs and a stack of firewood covered against spring rains. Ethan moved with efficient purpose, kneeling to build up the fire that had burned down to coals. Within moments, flames crackled to life. He added larger pieces of wood until the fire blazed with welcome heat. "There is a spare blanket in that pack," he pointed without looking at her, his attention focused on the fire. "You can change behind the shelter. Hang your wet things on the line I have strung between those trees. They will dry by the fire." Josephine clutched her carpet bag and his vest, suddenly awkward. This stranger was offering her privacy and practical help without any hint of impropriety. It shamed her that she had expected otherwise, based solely on the warnings of prejudiced women who had never met him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this. I misjudged you." Ethan glanced up at her then, firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "Most people do. I have learned not to let it bother me." He turned back to the fire. "Change quickly before you catch your death. I will keep watch for any travelers on the trail." Josephine hurried behind the shelter, her cold fingers fumbling with the buttons of her sodden dress. She found the blanket where he said it would be, soft wool that smelled faintly of sage. Her carpet bag had survived its river journey mostly intact, and she pulled out her second dress, a simple brown calico that she had packed for everyday wear. Getting out of the wet clothes felt like peeling away a layer of ice. Her kameez and petticoats were soaked through, and she had no choice but to strip down completely before wrapping herself in the wool blanket while her skin dried. She hung everything on the line as instructed, then quickly dressed in the dry clothes. Her hair was still wet, but she braided it back as best she could with numb fingers. When she emerged from behind the shelter, Ethan had a tin cup of something steaming waiting by the fire. He had positioned 2 logs as makeshift seats at a respectful distance from each other. His back was to her, giving her privacy until she was ready. "I am decent now," Josephine said softly. He turned and gestured to one of the log seats. "Sit close to the fire. Drink that. It is sage tea. It will help warm you from the inside." Josephine settled onto the log, holding her cold hands toward the flames. The heat felt glorious against her frozen skin. She picked up the tin cup and sipped cautiously. The tea was bitter, but warming, spreading heat down her throat and into her chest. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crackling fire and the distant call of a bird. Josephine studied Ethan from the corner of her eye. He sat with his back straight, staring into the flames with an expression that suggested his thoughts were far away. Without his vest, she could see the play of muscle under his buckskin shirt and the scars that marked his arms. He had seen violence, survived it, carried it with him. "Why did you laugh?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Ethan blinked and looked at her, pulled from whatever thoughts had held him. What? When you saw me in the river, why did you find it so funny? He was quiet for a moment, as though considering whether to answer honestly. Then his lips curved in a slight smile. Because you looked so fierce standing there soaking wet, glaring at me like I was the river's fault. Like if you just got angry enough, the current would apologize and carry you to shore. He shook his head. You reminded me of a wet cat, small and furious and convinced it could fight anything. Josephine felt her own lips twitch despite herself. A wet cat? How flattering. Cats are survivors. Ethan's smile faded. They have to be, in this land. You will need that fierceness if you plan to teach here. This town is not always welcoming to outsiders. Are you speaking from experience? His expression shuddered. I live between two worlds. The Apache see me as too white. The whites see me as too native. I belong nowhere completely. He met her eyes across the fire. But I have learned to survive anyway. Like the cat. Josephine thought about that, sipping her tea. She had come to Wyoming territory running from her own past, searching for her younger brother who had disappeared into these wild lands 3 years ago. She too was an outsider, a Boston schoolteacher with no family, and no place she truly belonged. I am sorry, she said quietly, for how people have treated you. It is not right. Ethan shrugged. Right and wrong do not matter much out here, only strong and weak, smart and foolish, those who survive and those who do not. He studied her face. Which are you, Josephine Sullivan? Strong or weak? She lifted her chin. I am here, am I not? I left everything I knew to come to this place. I will teach children who need education. I will make a life for myself. She paused. I am stronger than I look. Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of respect, or perhaps recognition. Yes, I think perhaps you are. The moment stretched between them, awareness crackling like the fire. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the flames. This man, this stranger who had laughed at her and then helped her, saw something in her that most people missed. Not the proper Boston lady or the foolish Easterner. Something real underneath. A horse's whinny broke the spell. Ethan's head snapped toward the trail, his entire body going tense. His hand moved to the knife at his belt with practiced speed. Someone is coming, he said quietly. Stay behind me. Josephine rose and moved closer to him without thinking, her heart suddenly pounding. The fire crackled and popped, too loud in the tense silence. Ethan's entire focus was on the trail, his body coiled like a spring ready to release. Then a figure emerged from the trees. A white man, tall and lean, wearing a dusty black coat and a gun belt slung low on his hips. His face was hard and weathered, with pale eyes that swept over the camp, before fixing on Josephine with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Well now, the man said, his voice carrying a mocking drawl. Looks like I found what I was looking for. His hand rested casually on his gun. Hello, Josie. Been a long time. Josephine felt the blood drain from her face. Her fingers gripped Ethan's arm without her conscious permission, seeking stability as the ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Augustus Caldwell, the man who had destroyed her life in Boston. The man she had fled across the country to escape. the man who should have had no way of knowing where she had gone. He had found her anyway. "You know this man?" Ethan's voice was low and dangerous, his muscles tense under her hand. "Yes." Josephine forced the word past her tight throat. "His name is Augustus Caldwell. He is a hired gun." She took a breath, steadying herself. "And he is here to kill me." Augustus laughed, a cold sound that sent chills down her spine. "Now, Josie, do not be so dramatic. I am just here to bring you home. Your dear brother has been looking for you everywhere." His smile turned cruel. "Though I admit, I might have to persuade you a bit. And I do so enjoy the persuading." Josephine felt Ethan shift in front of her, placing his body between her and Augustus. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but held an edge that promised violence. "The lady is under my protection now. You will leave this place." Augustus's eyes narrowed. "An Indian giving me orders. That is rich." His hand tightened on his gun. "Step aside, savage. This does not concern you." "It concerns me now." Ethan's hand remained steady on his knife hilt. "You have 3 seconds to walk away. If you draw that gun, you will not live to regret it." The two men faced each other across the fire, tension thick enough to choke on. Josephine's mind raced. Augustus was a professional killer, unpredictable and volatile. He would not hesitate to shoot Ethan if he felt threatened. And despite Ethan's confidence, a knife against a gun was no fair fight. "Augustus, please." Josephine stepped out from behind Ethan, ignoring his sharp hiss of warning. "Just leave. I have nothing you want. Whatever my brother told you, it was a lie." Augustus's attention snapped back to her, his pale eyes roaming over her in a way that made her feel dirty. "Oh, but you do have something I want, Josie. You always did." He took a step closer. "And your brother is paying me very well to bring you back. But maybe we can come to a different arrangement. Just you. And me." Ethan moved like lightning. One moment he was standing still, the next his knife was pressed against Augustus's throat, having crossed the distance in a blur of motion. The gunslinger froze, his hand hovering over his weapon. "I said leave." Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. "There will not be a third warning." Augustus's eyes flickered with something between fear and rage. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, carefully, he raised his hands away from his gun. "All right, savage, you win this round." He stepped back as Ethan withdrew the knife, but his eyes remained fixed on Josephine. "But I will be back, Josie. And next time, your Indian friend will not be here to protect you. Your brother wants you home, and I always complete my jobs." He turned and melted back into the trees, his footsteps fading into silence. Josephine realized she was shaking again, but this time not from cold. Ethan remained tense, watching the forest until the sounds of a horse moving away reached them. Then he turned to her, his expression fierce. "Tell me everything. Now, who is your brother, and why does he want you dead?" Josephine sank onto the log by the fire, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. The warmth of the flames did nothing to chase away the ice that had formed in her veins. She had hoped, foolishly, that coming to Wyoming territory would mean safety. That distance and anonymity would protect her. She had been wrong. "My brother's name is Marcus Sullivan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He is not looking for me out of brotherly concern. He wants me dead, because I know the truth about what he did. Ethan settled onto the log across from her, his dark eyes intent on her face. He said nothing, just waited for her to continue. Josephine took a shaky breath. 3 years ago, Marcus was engaged to marry the daughter of a wealthy shipping merchant in Boston. It was a business arrangement more than a love match, but it would have made him very rich and powerful. Then one night, I came home early from visiting a friend and found him in our parlor with another woman. They were arguing violently. She paused, the memory still vivid after all this time. The woman was his mistress. She was threatening to tell his fiancée about their affair unless he gave her money. I watched from the doorway as Marcus lost his temper. He grabbed her and shook her so hard her head snapped back. When she fell, she hit her head on the fireplace hearth. There was so much blood. Ethan's expression remained neutral, but she saw his hands tighten into fists. I ran to her, tried to help her, but she was already gone. Marcus just stood there, staring at her body. Then he looked at me and said, "You saw nothing. If you speak of this to anyone, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your very short life." Josephine wrapped her arms around herself. He staged it to look like a robbery gone wrong. The police never suspected him. His engagement went through as planned. And I kept silent because I was terrified. "Why did you finally run?" "Because 6 months ago, Marcus's new wife died in a suspicious fall down the stairs. And then I heard him talking to Augustus Caldwell about finding his troublesome sister, who knew too much." She met Ethan's eyes. I realized he planned to tie up loose ends. I was the only person who knew he was capable of murder. So I took what little money I had saved, bought a train ticket, and disappeared. "You came here to teach." "I came here to hide." Josephine's laugh was bitter. "And to search for my younger brother Thomas. He left Boston 3 years ago to seek his fortune in the gold fields. He is only 17 now, and I have not heard from him in over a year. I thought if I could find him, warn him about Marcus, we could protect each other." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, firelight playing across his scarred features. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "This Marcus, he is your older brother?" "Yes. By 8 years. And the younger one, Thomas, he knows nothing of the murder?" "No. He left before it happened. He and Marcus never got along anyway. Thomas was always the dreamer, talking about going west and finding gold. Marcus thought he was a fool." Josephine's throat tightened. "I just want to find him, make sure he is safe, and stay far away from Marcus and his hired killers. Augustus Caldwell will come back." Ethan's tone was matter-of-fact. "Men like him do not give up once they have taken a job. He knows you are here now. The town is small. He will find you easily." "I know." Josephine felt despair wash over her. She had been so careful, used a false name to buy her ticket, told no one where she was going. But somehow, Marcus had still tracked her down. "I will have to leave. Find somewhere else to hide. Or you could stop hiding." She looked up sharply. Ethan was watching her with an expression she could not read. "What do you mean?" "Running will not help. Your brother has money and connections. He will find you again, no matter where you go." Ethan leaned forward, his intense gaze holding hers. "But if you stay here, you will have protection. This is my land. The town tolerates me because I know these mountains better than anyone, and I keep the peace when trouble comes. If I say you are under my protection, most people will respect that. Most people? Augustus Caldwell is not most people, but he is only one man. Ethan's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. And I have dealt with worse than him. Josephine wanted to refuse. Accepting protection from a stranger, especially one she had just met in such humiliating circumstances, felt wrong. She had been taking care of herself for months now, surviving on her own. The idea of becoming dependent on someone else, of putting them in danger because of her problems, made her stomach turn. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive this long, knew he was right. Running again would only buy her a little time. Marcus would track her down eventually. At least here, she had a job waiting, and potentially an ally who seemed capable of defending himself. And maybe, if she stayed, she could find Thomas. He had written once from a mining camp in the mountains north of here. If she could locate him, warn him about Marcus, then at least her younger brother would be safe even if she was not. Why would you help me? The question came out softer than she intended. You do not know me. My problems are not yours. Ethan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain. 10 years ago, my mother was killed by white men who thought Native women were less than human. They were never punished. No one cared enough to seek justice for an Apache woman. He looked up at her. I learned then that the world is full of people who prey on those weaker than themselves. And I learned that sometimes the only justice comes from those willing to fight for it. Their eyes met across the fire, and Josephine felt something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger who had laughed at her distress and then helped her anyway, understood what it meant to be powerless, to be hunted, to watch injustice and have no way to stop it. I accept your help, she said quietly. Thank you. Ethan nodded once. Then we should get you to town before full dark. The schoolhouse has living quarters attached. You will be safe there for tonight. Tomorrow, we will make plans. He stood and began gathering her dried clothes from the line, folding them with surprising care before placing them back in her carpet bag. Josephine rose and collected the tin cup, rinsing it in a water bucket near the shelter. Normal, domestic actions that felt surreal given what had just happened. When everything was packed, Ethan whistled sharply. His paint horse trotted over, tossing its head. He saddled the animal with practiced efficiency, then turned to Josephine. Can you ride? I learned as a child, but it has been years. You will ride with me then. It is faster and safer than walking. He swung up into the saddle, then reached down to her. Give me your hand. Josephine hesitated only a moment before taking his offered hand. He pulled her up behind him with easy strength. She settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware of how close she was to him, how her arms had to wrap around his waist to keep from falling. Hold on, Ethan said, and urged the horse forward. They moved through the darkening forest at a steady pace, the horse sure-footed on the narrow trail. Josephine held on tight, feeling the warmth of Ethan's body against hers, the steady rhythm of his breathing. The scent of sage and wood smoke clung to his buckskin shirt. Despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty churning in her stomach, she felt oddly safe pressed against his back. The town appeared after about 20 minutes. A small collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street. Oil lamps glowed in windows as families settled in for the evening. The schoolhouse stood at the far end of the street, a simple white building with a bell tower and a smaller structure attached to the side that must be the teachers' quarters. Ethan guided the horse to the side door of the living quarters and dismounted, then helped Josephine down. Her legs felt shaky after the ride, and his hands steadied her until she found her balance. "Wait here," he said quietly, then disappeared around the front of the building. Josephine stood in the growing darkness, clutching her carpet bag and watching shadows lengthen across the dirt street. A few curious faces appeared in windows, watching the Apache warrior and the strange woman. She felt their stares like physical touches, judging and assessing. Ethan returned with an older woman who carried a ring of keys. She had iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and shrewd blue eyes that swept over Josephine with the efficiency of someone used to making quick judgments. "So you are the new teacher?" The woman's voice was crisp. "I am Mrs. Henderson. I manage the schoolhouse keys and supplies." She unlocked the door and pushed it open. "You were expected 3 days ago. We were beginning to think you had changed your mind." "The stagecoach was delayed," Josephine said, which was true enough. "I apologize for the late arrival." Mrs. Henderson lit an oil lamp just inside the door, casting warm light over a small but tidy room. There was a narrow bed against one wall, a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves for storage. Simple, but clean and functional. "The schoolhouse is through that connecting door," Mrs. Henderson said, pointing. "Classes start at 8 in the morning. You have 15 students ranging from age 6 to 14. Some of them speak mostly German, so be prepared for that. Firewood is in the shed outside. Well is behind the building. Outhouse is past the shed." She set the keys on the table with a decisive clink. "Any questions?" About 1,000, Josephine thought. But she just shook her head. "No, ma'am. Thank you." Mrs. Henderson's sharp gaze moved to Ethan, who stood just outside the door. Her expression hardened. "I trust you will be leaving now, Ethan. It would not do for the new teacher's reputation to be ruined her first night here. I was just making sure she arrived safely." Ethan's tone was neutral, but Josephine heard the edge beneath it. "The trail can be dangerous after dark." "I am sure it can." Mrs. Henderson's meaning was clear. She thought Ethan himself was the danger. "Good night, then." She swept past him and disappeared into the darkness, her footsteps crisp and purposeful on the dirt path. Josephine saw Ethan's jaw tighten, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "Thank you for bringing me here," Josephine said softly, stepping to the doorway. "I appreciate everything you have done." Ethan looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable in the lamplight. "Lock your door tonight. Keep your windows shuttered. If Augustus Caldwell comes, scream. The sheriff lives 3 buildings down. His name is Tom Whitmore. He is a decent man, for the most part. You will not stay nearby?" "I will be watching." His lips curved slightly. "You will not see me, but I will be there. Sleep without fear, little cat." Before she could respond to the nickname or thank him again, he melted into the shadows. She heard his horse's hooves retreat into the night, the sound fading until only the gentle creak of the building and distant voices from the saloon remained. Josephine closed the door and turned the lock, then leaned against the solid wood and finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking. The weight of everything that had happened crashed over her all at once. she had fallen in a river, met a stranger who had laughed at her, then saved her, been found by the very man she had crossed the country to escape, and somehow ended up under the protection of an Apache warrior who saw her as a wet cat. It was absurd. It was terrifying. And underneath all of that, there was something else. A strange flutter in her chest when she thought about Ethan's steady hands pulling her from the river. The warmth of his vest around her shoulders. The way he had placed himself between her and danger without hesitation. Stop it, she told herself firmly. You cannot afford distractions. You have a killer hunting you and a brother to find. Romance is not even a possibility, especially not with a man the whole town clearly disapproves of. But as she unpacked her meager belongings and prepared for bed, she could not quite banish the memory of his dark eyes watching her across the campfire, or the feeling of safety she had experienced, pressed against his back as they rode through the forest. She slept fitfully that night, waking at every sound. But morning came without incident, bringing weak spring sunlight through the shuttered windows and the sound of children's voices gathering outside the schoolhouse. Josephine dressed in her brown calico, pinned her hair up properly, and took a deep breath. Whatever else was happening, she had a job to do. These children deserved a good teacher, regardless of her personal troubles. She stepped through the connecting door into the schoolhouse and found 15 young faces staring at her with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, and hope. She smiled at them, pushing down her fear and exhaustion. Good morning. My name is Miss Sullivan, and I am very pleased to meet all of you. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Josephine taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to her students. She learned their names and their struggles. Little Emma Schmidt, who spoke barely any English but had beautiful handwriting. Jacob Turner, who could calculate complex problems in his head but refused to show his work. Sarah Chen, whose father ran the general store and who translated for the other children when Josephine's explanations were not clear. The townspeople kept their distance, watching her with the wariness frontier folk showed all outsiders. But they were not unkind. Mrs. Henderson brought her a jar of preserves. The blacksmith's wife sent over fresh bread. The doctor stopped by to introduce himself and make sure she knew where to find him if needed. Of Ethan, she saw nothing for 3 days. But each morning, she found small signs that he had been watching. A stack of firewood that had not been there the night before. Fresh water in her bucket. Once, a bundle of sage tied with leather cord left on her doorstep. On the 4th morning, she found him leaning against the schoolhouse wall when she emerged at dawn to fetch water. He straightened when he saw her, his face unreadable. You have been watching every night, she said. It was not a question. Yes. Have you seen Augustus? No. But he is still in town. He took a room at the boarding house and has been asking questions about you. Ethan's jaw tightened. The town knows you are the new teacher. They know you came from the east. But they do not know why you are running, or who is after you. I suggest we keep it that way. Josephine set down her water bucket. I cannot ask you to keep doing this. You must have your own life, your own responsibilities. I do. He pushed away from the wall and moved closer. In the early morning light, she could see the shadows under his eyes. He had been losing sleep to watch over her. But right now, keeping you alive is more important. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. You barely know me. I am nothing to you." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Because when I pulled you from that river, you looked at me like I was a man, not a savage, not something to fear or use, just a man who could help you." He paused. "Not many people look at me that way." Josephine felt her throat tighten. "You are a man, a good one, from what I have seen. Good is a matter of perspective." But something in his expression softened. "I have done things, Josephine. Things that would make you fear me if you knew. But I choose who I protect and who I fight. And I choose to protect you." The air between them felt charged, full of unspoken words. Josephine's heart beat faster, and she was suddenly very aware of how close he was standing, how tall he was compared to her, how his presence made her feel safe and unsettled all at once. "I should get ready for school," she said softly. Ethan nodded and stepped back. "I will continue watching at night. But during the day, stay alert. Keep to populated areas. Do not go anywhere alone." "I understand." He turned to leave, then paused. "There is something else. I have been asking questions about your brother Thomas. There was a boy matching his description working at a mining camp north of here last winter. But he left when the snows came. The miners said he was heading further into the mountains, chasing rumors of a big strike." Hope flared in Josephine's chest. "He is alive? You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing him myself. I plan to ride north tomorrow, follow his trail. If he is still in these mountains, I will find him. Take me with you." The words came out before she thought them through. "Please. He is my brother. I need to see him, talk to him. It is too dangerous. The mountains are still deep in snow. And if Augustus follows us, we would be exposed. Then we leave at night. We move fast and careful. But please, Ethan, I have been searching for Thomas for months. If there is a chance he is out there, I have to take it." Josephine stepped closer, looking up at him with all the pleading she could not put into words. "I will not slow you down. I can ride, and I can shoot if needed. Just give me this chance." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. Then he sighed. "You are as stubborn as you are small. Is that a yes?" "It is against my better judgment." His hand came up, almost touching her shoulder before he caught himself and dropped it. "But yes, we leave tomorrow night after the town sleeps. Dress warmly. The mountains are cold even in spring. And if I say we turn back, we turn back. No arguments." "Agreed." Relief washed through her. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. We may not find him. Or we may find things we do not wish to see." His expression was grim. "The mountains take men, Josephine. They do not always give them back." "I know. But I have to try." He nodded slowly. "Then we will try together. Now go. Your students are arriving." She glanced over and saw children beginning to gather by the schoolhouse door, watching her conversation with Ethan with wide eyes. Mrs. Henderson was crossing the street with her characteristic purposeful stride, her disapproving gaze fixed on them. Josephine picked up her water bucket and hurried inside. but not before catching Ethan's slight smile as he melted away into the morning shadows. The day passed slowly. Josephine tried to focus on her lessons, but her mind kept drifting to the journey ahead. She had told Ethan she could ride, which was technically true. But it had been years since she had done more than a sedate trot through Boston's parks. Mountain riding in dangerous terrain was entirely different. And then, there was Augustus. He was out there somewhere, watching and waiting. The thought made her skin crawl. She found herself checking the windows constantly, searching the faces of anyone who passed by the schoolhouse. When school finally ended and the last student left, Josephine tried to prepare for the journey. She had so few belongings that packing was quick. A change of clothes, her mother's Bible, the small Derringer pistol her father had given her before he died. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. She was folding her spare dress when she heard a soft knock at her door. Her heart jumped into her throat. It was barely past 5 in the afternoon, too early for Ethan. She approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "Sheriff Whitmore, Miss Sullivan. I need to speak with you." Josephine opened the door to find a middle-aged man with a weathered face and kind brown eyes standing on her step. He wore a sheriff's star pinned to his vest and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable with authority. "Sheriff, is something wrong? May I come in? This is not a conversation for the street." She stepped aside, and he entered, removing his hat. His gaze swept over the room, noting the packed bag on her bed, before returning to her face. "I will be direct, Miss Sullivan. I know a man named Augustus Caldwell is in town, and I know he is looking for you. I also know Ethan has been watching your place at night." He held up a hand when she opened her mouth to speak. "I am not here to cause trouble. I am here to offer help." Josephine sank into one of the chairs at her table, her knees suddenly weak. "What do you know about Augustus?" "Enough to know he is dangerous. He has a reputation as a hired gun. Not the fastest draw in the West, but unpredictable and willing to take jobs others will not touch." Sheriff Whitmore sat across from her. "I ran him out of a town in Colorado 5 years ago for murdering a shopkeeper. Could not prove it, but I knew. So when he showed up here asking questions about a young schoolteacher from Boston, I got curious. He was hired by my brother to bring me back east. There was no point in lying. My brother wants me dead because I witnessed him commit murder." The sheriff's expression did not change, but she saw his hand tighten on his hat. "I thought it might be something like that. No man tracks a woman halfway across the country unless the stakes are high. Will you arrest Augustus?" "On what charge? He has not broken any laws here. Yet." Sheriff Whitmore leaned forward. "But I can make life difficult for him. Keep him under watch. Make sure he knows I am aware of his presence. It might buy you some time." "Thank you. That is more help than I expected. I am doing it as much for Ethan as for you." The sheriff's tone was frank. "That boy has had a hard life. His mother was a good woman, and what happened to her was a crime that was never punished. If he has decided to protect you, then you must be worth protecting. And I owe him. He has helped this town more times than I can count, even when we have not always treated him well." Josephine felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. It mattered that someone in this town saw Ethan for who he truly was. "He is," a good man. He is. But he is also dangerous when provoked. If Augustus pushes him, blood will spill. The sheriff stood. Where are you planning to go with that packed bag? She hesitated, then decided honesty was her best option. North. Into the mountains. I am searching for my younger brother. Ethan knows where he might be. The northern mountains are rough country this time of year. Snow still deep in the high passes. He studied her face. But you are going anyway. I have to. Thomas is only 17. If my older brother finds him before I do, he will be in danger too. Sheriff Whitmore nodded slowly. Then I will give you some advice. Stay on the eastern trails. The western routes are controlled by a gang of claim jumpers who do not take kindly to strangers. And if you hear gunfire, ride the other direction. There has been trouble in the mining camps lately. What kind of trouble? The kind that gets men killed. He moved to the door, then paused. One more thing. Augustus has been talking to some unsavory types at the saloon. I do not know what he is planning, but whatever it is, it will not be good. Watch your back, Miss Sullivan, and tell Ethan to watch his. After he left, Josephine sat in the growing darkness and tried to calm her racing heart. The sheriff's warning about Augustus planning something made her want to cancel the journey, to stay locked in her room where it was safe. But Thomas was out there somewhere. Her little brother, barely more than a boy, alone in hostile mountains. She could not abandon him to save herself. She lit her lamp and tried to eat some of the bread Mrs. Henderson had brought, but her stomach was too tight to accept food. Instead, she cleaned and loaded her Derringer with shaking hands, checking and rechecking the mechanism. The small pistol would not stop a determined attacker, but it was better than nothing. Night fell completely. Josephine changed into her warmest clothes, layering a wool jacket over her dress and pulling on sturdy boots. She wrapped her spare dress and other necessities in a bedroll, added some dried meat and biscuits from her small pantry, and checked the Derringer one last time before slipping it into her jacket pocket. A soft tap at her window made her jump. She pulled back the shutter to find Ethan crouched outside, his horse waiting in the shadows behind the schoolhouse. Ready? His voice was barely a whisper. Yes. She blew out the lamp and slipped out the door, locking it behind her. Ethan took her bedroll and tied it to his saddle, then helped her mount. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and even through her jacket she felt the warmth of his touch. If you want to change your mind, now is the time, he said softly. I am not changing my mind. He swung up behind her this time, his arms coming around her to take the reins. The position put her back against his chest, surrounded by his presence. She felt his breath stir her hair. Then hold on, little cat. The path ahead is not easy. He urged the horse forward, and they moved into the night, leaving the sleeping town behind. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over the landscape. They rode north, following a trail that wound through pine forest and across open meadows still dotted with patches of snow. They rode in silence for over an hour, the only sounds the horses' hooves and the whisper of wind through the trees. Josephine let herself relax against Ethan's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back. Despite the danger and uncertainty ahead, she felt a strange sense of peace. Tell me about Thomas, Ethan said quietly. What is he like? Josephine smiled in the darkness. Stubborn, impulsive, too trusting for his own good. He always believed the best of people, even when they did not deserve it. Her smile faded. He and Marcus never got along. Marcus thought Thomas was a fool for wanting to be a prospector instead of joining the family business. They had a terrible fight right before Thomas left. Marcus said some cruel things. Thomas swore he would find gold and prove Marcus wrong. Did he? I do not know. His letters stopped coming over a year ago. At first, I thought maybe he had just moved camps and had no way to send mail. But then months went by with no word, and I started to worry. She paused. Marcus might have already found him. That thought terrifies me. Ethan's arms tightened around her slightly. We will find him. I promise you that, whether the news is good or bad. Not knowing is its own torture. They rode on through the night, climbing steadily into the foothills. The air grew colder, and the patches of snow more frequent. Around midnight, Ethan guided the horse off the main trail and into a sheltered hollow, where a small stream burbled over rocks. We will rest here until dawn. The horse needs water and rest, and so do you. Josephine slid down from the saddle, her legs stiff from the long ride. Ethan tended to his horse, while she gathered fallen pine branches for a fire. He had it blazing within minutes, the flames pushing back the cold darkness. They sat close to the fire, sharing the dried meat and biscuits she had brought. The food was plain, but satisfying after the long ride. Josephine watched Ethan's face in the firelight, noting the way the shadows emphasized his strong features and the scars that marked his skin. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "You can ask. I may not answer. Why do you live alone? You mentioned belonging to the Apache, but you do not live with them." Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he would not respond. Then he sighed. "After my mother was killed, I left the tribe. I was angry. I wanted revenge against the men who murdered her. But the tribal elders counseled peace. They said more violence would only bring more death." His jaw tightened. I could not accept that. So I tracked those men down, and I killed them. All 3 of them. Josephine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. When I returned to the tribe, the elders said I had dishonored them by acting alone, by choosing revenge over wisdom. They did not banish me, but they made it clear I was not welcome anymore. He stared into the fire. So I left. I have been alone ever since. I live between the town and the wilderness, belonging to neither, but useful to both. I am sorry. The words felt inadequate. You should not have been forced to choose between justice and your people. There is no should in this world, only what is. He looked at her then, his dark eyes reflecting firelight. But I do not regret my choice. Those men deserved to die for what they did. And if I had not left the tribe, I would not have been by that river when you fell in. Their eyes met and held. Josephine felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. There was loneliness there, and pain, but also something that made her pulse quicken. Heat that had nothing to do with the fire. "I am glad you were there," she whispered. "So am I." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Ethan's hand moved, his fingers brushing against hers where they rested on the ground. The touch was light, questioning. Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. Then a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the fire. Ethan was on his feet instantly, knife in hand, his body between her and the sound. Josephine scrambled up, reaching for her derringer with shaking hands. "Come out," Ethan called into the darkness. "I know you are there." For a long moment, nothing. Then a figure emerged from the trees, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Moonlight fell across his face, and Josephine felt her world tilt. He was young, barely 17, with sandy brown hair and familiar green eyes. Too thin, his clothes worn and patched, but unmistakably alive. "Thomas?" Her voice broke on his name. Her brother's eyes widened in shock. "Josie? What in God's name are you doing here?" She ran to him, her derringer forgotten, and threw her arms around him. He was real and solid and alive. Tears streamed down her face as she held him tight. "I have been searching for you," she gasped out. "Your letters stopped. I thought you were dead. I am sorry." Thomas hugged her back just as tightly. "The mail service out here is terrible, and I have been moving around so much. I meant to write more, I swear." He pulled back to look at her face. "But seriously, Josie, what are you doing in the mountains at night with an Indian?" Ethan made a sound that might have been amusement. "The Indian's name is Ethan, and I am helping your sister stay alive." Thomas's expression turned wary. "Stay alive from what?" "From Marcus." Josephine wiped her eyes. "Thomas, we have so much to tell you. Marcus murdered his mistress 3 years ago. I witnessed it. Now he has hired a gunslinger to kill me before I can tell anyone." The color drained from Thomas's face. "Marcus? Our brother Marcus?" "Yes. And he might come after you too, if he thinks you know anything." Thomas stumbled to the fire and sat down hard, his hands shaking. "Jesus, I knew Marcus was cold, but murder?" He looked up at her. "Are you sure? I saw it with my own eyes. I watched the woman die." Josephine sat beside him, taking his hand. "I came west to warn you, to find you before Marcus did." "Well, you found me," Thomas laughed shakily. "Though I am not sure what we do now. We cannot exactly go to the law. Marcus is rich and connected. Who would believe us?" "The sheriff here might," Ethan said quietly. "But first we need to get you both somewhere safe." Thomas looked at Ethan properly for the first time, taking in his traditional clothing and the knife still in his hand. "You are helping my sister out of the goodness of your heart?" "Thomas, he saved my life." Josephine's tone was sharp. "Multiple times. Show some respect." "No, he has a right to be suspicious." Ethan sheathed his knife and moved to tend the fire. "I am helping your sister because she needs help, and I am able to give it. That is all you need to know." Something in his tone made Thomas relax slightly. He studied Ethan for another moment, then nodded. "All right. Thank you for protecting my sister. I mean that." "You are welcome. Now tell us why you were creeping around our camp in the middle of the night." Thomas grimaced. "I was not creeping. I was tracking. I saw your fire from the ridge and came to investigate. There have been claim jumpers in these mountains, attacking lone prospectors and stealing their findings. I wanted to make sure you were not part of that gang before I revealed myself." "We are not." Ethan settled back by the fire. "But the claim jumpers are why we need to be careful. This territory is more dangerous than it was even a year ago." "Tell me about it," 3 prospectors were killed last month, shot in the back, and their claims stolen. Thomas's expression was grim. I have been moving my camp every few days, trying to stay ahead of them. Have you found any gold? Josephine asked. Some. Not the big strike I was hoping for, but enough to keep me going. Thomas looked at her, his young face suddenly seeming much older. Josie, I am sorry you came all this way to find me, but I cannot go back east. Even without Marcus trying to kill us, there is nothing for me there. This is my life now. End quote. I know. Josephine squeezed his hand. I am not asking you to come back. I just needed to make sure you were safe, to warn you about Marcus. Well, I am warned. He smiled at her. And it is really good to see you, even if the circumstances are terrible. I missed you. I missed you too. They spent the next hour catching up, Thomas telling stories of his prospecting adventures, while Josephine shared news from Boston before her flight west. Ethan remained quiet, watching the forest around them with alert eyes. Finally, as the fire burned low, Thomas yawned. I should get back to my camp. It is about an hour from here. Stay, Ethan said. It is safer to move in daylight. We can all ride out together at dawn. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. All right. Thanks. They settled in for what remained of the night, Thomas wrapping himself in his worn bedroll on one side of the fire, while Josephine and Ethan took the other. She lay down with her back to the flames, acutely aware of Ethan settling beside her. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for finding him. He found us, Ethan murmured back. But I am glad he is safe. You can stop worrying now. I wish I could, but Augustus is still out there. And now Thomas is in danger too. We will figure it out, together. His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently. Sleep, Josephine. I will keep watch. She wanted to protest, to tell him he needed rest too. But the warmth of his hand in hers and the exhaustion dragging at her made the words impossible. Within minutes, she drifted into sleep. She woke to pale dawn light and the smell of coffee. Thomas was crouched by the fire, having revived it and set a battered pot to boil. Ethan stood at the edge of camp, his attention fixed on something in the distance. What is it? Josephine sat up, pushing hair out of her face. Riders. 3 of them, coming up the trail we used last night. Thomas cursed and scrambled to his feet. The Clane jumpers? Maybe. Or Augustus found our trail. Ethan moved swiftly, kicking dirt over the fire. We need to leave. Now. They packed in frantic silence, Thomas helping tie bedrolls while Josephine stuffed supplies into saddlebags. Ethan's paint horse sensed the urgency and danced nervously. There is a narrow canyon about half a mile north, Thomas said. We can lose them there if we move fast. Lead the way. They mounted quickly, Thomas swinging up behind Josephine. The horse protested the extra weight but responded to Ethan's commands. They rode hard, branches whipping past as they followed Thomas's directions through increasingly rough terrain. Behind them, Josephine heard shouts. The riders had found their abandoned camp. They are following, she said, her heart pounding. I know. Hold on. The canyon Thomas mentioned appeared ahead, a narrow slash in the rock barely wide enough for a horse. Ethan urged the paint through at a gallop, trusting the animal's sure feet even as rocks scraped their legs and pine branches caught at their clothes. They burst out the other side into a wider valley filled with morning mist. Thomas pointed to a cluster of rocks. "My camp is behind those. We can defend it if we have to." They made it to the rocks and dismounted, Ethan pulling his rifle from its saddle holster, while Thomas grabbed an old shotgun from his hidden supplies. Josephine checked her derringer, wishing she had something more substantial. The sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. 3 riders emerged from the narrow opening, their faces hard and their weapons drawn. Josephine's blood turned to ice. The lead rider was Augustus Caldwell, and the 2 men with him looked like exactly what Thomas had described. Claim jumpers, rough and dangerous. The kind of men who killed for money and had no conscience about it. Augustus's pale eyes found her across the distance, and he smiled. It was not a nice smile. "End of the line, Josie. Time to come home." Ethan stepped forward, rifle raised. "You are outnumbered and outgunned. Leave now, and you might live." Augustus laughed. 3 against 3. I like those odds." His hand rested on his gun. "And I have a job to finish." "Then finish it." Ethan's voice was deadly calm. "Draw your weapon." Time seemed to slow. Augustus's hand moved toward his gun. But before he could clear leather, a rifle shot cracked through the morning air. Sheriff Whitmore rode into the valley, his rifle smoking, flanked by 2 deputized townsmen. Augustus's horse reared, and the claim jumpers scattered, their courage evaporating in the face of real law. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff ordered. "All of you. You are under arrest for attempted murder and claim jumping." Augustus's face twisted with rage. But he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He raised his hand slowly. The claim jumpers followed suit, cursing. "How did you find us?" Josephine breathed. Sheriff Whitmore dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on the prisoners. "Ethan told me where you were headed before you left. When Augustus and these 2 rode out in the middle of the night, I followed." He smiled grimly. "Lucky I did." Within an hour, Augustus and his companions were trussed up and being led back toward town. Sheriff Whitmore had listened to Josephine's full story and promised to wire the authorities in Boston about Marcus's crimes. "Your testimony, combined with what we can get Augustus to confess, should be enough to see your brother hang," the sheriff said. "You will be safe now, Miss Sullivan. Both of you." As the sheriff and his prisoners disappeared down the trail, Josephine finally allowed herself to breathe. Thomas hugged her tight, and she felt years of fear and running drain away. "It is over," Thomas said softly. "You are free. We both are." Ethan approached them, his dark eyes warm. "I should get you back to town. You have students who need their teacher." "Yes." Josephine smiled at him. "I suppose I do." The ride back was peaceful, the morning sun warming away the last of the night's chill. Thomas rode ahead, on a borrowed horse, giving Josephine and Ethan space. "What will you do now?" Josephine asked quietly. "The same as always. Watch over the territory. Help where I can." He paused. "Though I may check on a certain school teacher more often. Make sure she stays out of rivers." Josephine laughed. "I would like that." His arms tightened around her waist. "Josephine, I know we have only known each other a few days. but I would like to know you better. If you will let me." Her heart soared. "I would like that very much." They rode into town as the sun climbed higher, and Josephine felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in years. She had found her brother. She was safe from Marcus. And the man holding her had become far more than a stranger who laughed at her misfortune. That evening, Thomas joined them for a quiet supper at the schoolhouse. Sheriff Whitmore stopped by with news that Augustus was talking, confirming everything Josephine had said about Marcus. "Justice will be done," the sheriff promised. "You have my word." After he left, the three of them sat around Josephine's small table, sharing coffee and conversation like family. Thomas told more stories about his prospecting adventures. Ethan spoke about the land and its rhythms. Josephine felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. When Thomas finally left for the boarding house where the sheriff had secured him a room, Ethan lingered at the door. "I am glad you fell in that river," he said softly. "Even though I looked like a wet cat?" "Especially because you looked like a wet cat." His hand cupped her cheek, his touch gentle. Fierce and stubborn and beautiful. Josephine's breath caught. "Ethan." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. When his lips met hers, soft and questioning, she felt something click into place in her heart. This was right. This was real. When they parted, his eyes searched hers. "I am not an easy man to be with. People will talk, judge. Let them." She smiled. "I am stronger than I look, remember?" "Yes, you are." He kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. I will see you tomorrow." After he left, Josephine stood in her doorway, watching him disappear into the night. Behind her, in the warm glow of the schoolhouse, lay her new life. Her students. Her brother, safe and whole. And a future she had never imagined. She thought about Marcus and Augustus, about fear and running. All of it felt distant now, like something that happened to someone else. Tomorrow she would teach. Thomas would prospect. Ethan would watch over the land. And maybe, if she was very lucky, there would be more quiet evenings like this one. More moments stolen by firelight. More kisses that felt like coming home. The spring wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of new beginnings. Josephine smiled and closed her door, ready for whatever came next.